怎么没？
第一把还是可以。
我
看见机械敌情，好像是声风暴，身材能稳定。我的记号，我心里是。
而报仇就是图。
还轮不到你们在这信。
啊！我知道，累。
老星，说吧。
为殒命，陈塘关和龙族并非势不两。
Fire cracks the sky open. Not thunder, not lightning, something alive, something angry. Ne Zha stands at the edge of the ruined shoreline, flames crawling across his skin like they belong there. The sea that once feared him is silent now, pulled back as if holding its breath. He should feel victorious. He doesn't, because beneath the roar of power in his veins, there's a tremor, a wrongness he can't name. Behind him, Li Jing's voice cuts through the smoke, sharp with fear, softer with hope. It's over, his father says, but Ne Zha feels it, deep, ancient, watching. The spirit pearl inside him stirs, not violently, but deliberately, like something waking up after a very long sleep. And for the first time since defying heaven itself, Ne Zha wonders if the greatest enemy hasn't revealed itself yet, because the fire around him suddenly bows, and something unseen whispers his name. The night doesn't celebrate Ne Zha's survival, it recoils from it. Lanterns flicker as the villagers emerge, cautious, whispering his name like it might burn their tongues. Some bow. Others stare as if the flames might return without warning. Ne Zha notices everything. The way children hide behind their mothers. The way elders avoid his eyes. Victory doesn't erase fear. It just changes its shape. He walks past them anyway. At the Li household, the doors close softly, shutting out the murmurs. Inside, the air is heavy with incense and unanswered questions. Lady Yin reaches for her son, fingers trembling as they brush the scorched fabric at his shoulder. He doesn't pull away. He lets her touch him. Just this once. "You scared us," she whispers. Ne Zha almost laughs. Instead, he looks down at his hands. The fire is gone, but the warmth remains. Too warm, like embers buried under skin. That night, sleep doesn't come gently. It crashes. He dreams of water turning black, of chains sinking into the ocean floor, of eyes, massive, ancient opening beneath the waves. And in the dream, someone is laughing. Not cruelly, patiently. Ne Zha wakes with a gasp, sweat cold on his back. Outside, the wind howls. Except it's not wind. It's chanting. By morning, Taiyi Genren arrives without ceremony, his gourd rattling louder than usual. His smile is still there, but it's stretched thin, like it doesn't quite fit the moment. "You felt it too, didn't you?" the immortal asks. Ne Zha stiffens. Felt what? Taiyi doesn't answer right away. He kneels, presses 2 fingers to the ground. The earth hums under his touch, not harmony. Warning. The balance shifted, he finally says. When you defied your fate, something else noticed. Li Jing's jaw tightens. Another curse? Another contract, Taiyi replies. Older than the heavens you angered. Ne Zha feels the spirit pearl pulse once, like a heartbeat that isn't his. They travel to the Dragon King's ruins by dusk. The sea is wrong. Too still, no waves, no birds, even sound seems afraid to linger. Broken pillars rise from the water like ribs from a drowned beast. At the center, a figure waits. Aobing steps forward, or what's left of him. Ice fractures his body, veins of frost crawling where warmth should be. His eyes meet Ne Zha's, and there's no hatred there, only urgency. "You broke the seal," Aobing says quietly. Ne Zha bristles. "I broke my curse." Aobing shakes his head. They were the same. The ocean floor trembles. Far below, something pulls at chains forged by gods who no longer remember why they were afraid. Aobing's voice drops. The Primordial Flood Dragon stirs, and it knows your name now. Silence. Then the water explodes upward. A shadow coils beneath the surface, vast enough to swallow kingdoms. The sky darkens as if bracing for impact. Ne Zha feels it then. Fear. Real fear, not of death, of purpose. Because deep inside, the spirit pearl answers the darkness. Like it's been waiting. The shadow doesn't rise fully. It doesn't need to. Just the suggestion of its presence is enough to make the sea scream. Water churns violently around the broken ruins, pillars snapping like twigs as pressure rolls outward. Ne Zha digs his heels into the stone, fire flaring instinctively, muscles locked as if bracing against a living mountain. He can't see the creature clearly. No scales, no eyes, just an endless coil of darkness beneath the surface, shifting slow and deliberate, confident. Ao Bing staggers, frost spreading faster across his chest. Each tremor from below sends cracks through his icy form. He grits his teeth, forcing himself to stand. It's testing the chains, he says. Every movement weakens them. Tai Zhanren raises his staff, symbols spinning wildly around its head. Those chains were forged before your time, he mutters. Before names like hero or demon meant anything at all. Ne Zha barely hears him, because the spirit pearl is burning now. Not like before, not wild. Focused. A heat that presses against his ribs, urging him forward. Step closer. Look deeper. He clenches his fists, fighting the pull. This power has always answered his anger, his defiance. But this feels like recognition, like being remembered. A roar ripples through the water, not sound, but force. Images slam into Ne Zha's mind, a world drowned in endless rain, gods fleeing the sky. A dragon so vast, it wrapped around mountains and squeezed until they cracked. And at the center of it all, a glowing core torn from its chest. The spirit pearl. Ne Zha gasps, dropping to one knee. It was his, he whispers before he can stop himself. Taiyi's head snaps toward him. What did you see? But Ao Bing already knows. His expression softens with something dangerously close to regret. The pearl wasn't a blessing, he says. It was a prison. They took his heart and split it, bound one half to order, the other to chaos. Yours was meant to keep him asleep. Li Jing steps forward, disbelief etched into every line of his face. Then my son was never meant to live. He was meant to contain. The words hang there. Heavy, unforgiving. Ne Zha laughs once, sharp, broken. Ne Zha laughs once, sharp, broken. Figures, he says. Even my existence is just another chain. The water surges again, closer this time. Opens in the sea, revealing a glimpse of something massive and coiling beneath, scales the size of city gates, glowing faintly with the same ember-red light that burns in Ne Zha's veins. The Primordial Flood Dragon is waking. Tai Yi slams his staff into the ground. Enough, we leave. Now. He looks at Ne Zha, eyes grave. If the dragon senses full resonance, it will tear itself free to reclaim what's inside you. And if I run? Ne Zha snaps. Tai Yi doesn't answer immediately. He doesn't have to. Ao Bing does. It will follow, he says quietly. Through oceans, through cities, through you. They retreat as the sea closes behind them, the ruins vanishing beneath boiling water. The journey back is silent, broken only by the distant groan of something straining against ancient bonds. Each sound feels closer than the last. That night, Ne Zha sits alone on the rooftop, knees drawn to his chest. The village sleeps uneasily below. He stares at the sky, watching clouds drift like indifferent gods. I was never free, he thinks, just useful. Footsteps. Soft. Lady Yin sits beside him without speaking, offering a warm bun wrapped in cloth. He doesn't take it. She doesn't push. You don't have to carry this alone, she finally says. He swallows. His throat feels tight. What if I'm the reason it all ends? She reaches out, presses her forehead to his. Then we face it together. For a moment, the heat inside him settles. Then the spirit pearl pulses again. Far away, deep beneath the ocean floor, a chain snaps. Not the first, just the loudest so far. By dawn, the sea has gone quiet again. Too quiet. Ne Zha feels it the moment his eyes open. The spirit pearl isn't humming anymore. It's listening. He sits up slowly, heart pounding, and for a second, he forgets where he is, until he sees the cracks spiderwebbing across the courtyard stones outside his window. Hairline fractures, still warm. Fresh. Something moved in the night. Tai Zhanren doesn't wait for explanations. He's already packing talismans, his usual laziness replaced by a sharp, coiled urgency. The chains are failing faster than I feared, he mutters. which means someone is helping them break. Li Jing freezes. Who would be insane enough to... The sky answers first. Clouds spiral inward above the distant mountains, folding over themselves like a wound reopening. Thunder rolls, low and rhythmic, not chaotic, measured, intentional. And riding that pressure comes a presence that makes Ne Zha's skin prickle. Divine. The heavenly envoy descends at noon. Golden armor, calm eyes, a voice that carries without effort. Shen Gongbao smiles as he steps onto the cracked earth, hands clasped politely as if he's arrived for tea instead of judgment. Behind him, the air itself seems to kneel. Heaven sends its regards, he says warmly, and its concern. Ne Zha bares his teeth. Funny, they didn't seem concerned when they cursed me at birth. Shen Gongbao's gaze flicks to him, assessing, curious. On the contrary, heaven has always watched you closely. He turns to Tai Yi, which is why we must act now. Tai Yi stiffens. Act how? By restoring balance, Shen replies. The primordial flood dragon must awaken. Silence crashes down harder than thunder. Li Jing steps forward, fury breaking through discipline. You want to unleash a calamity that nearly destroyed the world? Shen Gongbao nods once. Yes, Lady Yin gasps. Ne Zha laughs, short, disbelieving. You're insane. No, Shen says gently. I'm practical. He gestures, and the air between them fills with images. Gods scrambling. Heavenly palaces shattered, not by the dragon, but by something else. A vast, formless void pressing down from the heavens themselves. The flood dragon wasn't the enemy, Shen continues. It was a wall, a living barrier holding back something far worse. When the gods tore out its heart to forge the spirit pearl, they weakened that barrier. Now, the void stirs again. Tai Yi's face drains of color. The devouring silence has already begun to seep through, Shen finishes. One chain breaking is not a threat. All of them breaking at once is a solution. Ne Zha's breath comes fast. And where does that leave me? Shen finally looks at him fully. Really looks. You are the key, he says. When the dragon reclaims the spirit pearl, it will rise whole, strong enough to seal the heavens again. But the vessel, his eyes soften, just a fraction, will not survive the extraction. Lady Yin moves instantly, placing herself in front of her son. No. Shen inclines his head. A mother's love is admirable, but the choice isn't between your son and the world. It's between the world and nothing. Ne Zha feels something inside him, fracture, not the pearl, something quieter. All his life, people feared what he might become. Now, heaven wants him to disappear quietly, usefully. He thinks of the villagers, of Ao Bing slowly freezing from a destiny he didn't choose either, of the laughter he never got to keep. So that's it, Ne Zha says softly. I die. The dragon lives. Everyone sleeps better. Heroism often looks like erasure, Shen replies. Ne Zha steps past his mother. Fire licks his heels with every step. You don't get to decide that. Shen's smile fades. This is not a negotiation. Before anyone can react, the ground splits open. Water erupts skyward as a massive chain bursts from the earth, snapping free with a scream that echoes across the land. The ocean answers, surging toward the horizon as a colossal shape rises beneath it, no longer subtle, no longer waiting. The primordial flood dragon is breaking loose. And inside Ne Zha, the spirit pearl flares brighter than ever, burning, not with obedience, but with defiance. The world doesn't wait for agreement. The sea surges inland like it's reclaiming a debt, swallowing fields, roads, memories. Waves rise higher than city walls, and at their center, the primordial flood dragon ascends, not fully free, but no longer bound. Chains trail from its colossal body, glowing red-hot where they grind against ancient scales. Each movement sends shockwaves through the sky. Ne Zha stands frozen, fire raging around him, hair whipping in the storm wind. The spirit pearl is screaming now, not in pain, in urgency, in hunger. Ne Zha! Tai Yi shouts over the chaos. If the dragon pulls the pearl out by force, it won't just kill you, it will tear a hole straight through the realm. Shen Gongbao floats above the destruction, cloak untouched by wind or water. Then choose quickly, he calls down, because the dragon will not wait much longer. The dragon's head breaches the surface at last, mountains pale in comparison, its eyes open, twin suns burning with recognition the moment they lock onto Ne Zha. Not rage, not hatred, longing. The pressure hits Ne Zha like 1,000 hands pushing him forward. His knees buckle, fire sputters. For the first time since he was born, his power falters. Not because it's weak, but because it's being pulled home. Ao Bing staggers onto the flooded shore, ice cracking with every step. Ne Zha, he yells. Listen to me, he points at the dragon. It doesn't just want the pearl back, it wants you, your will, your defiance. That's what's kept it asleep this long. Ne Zha laughs bitterly. So what? I'm its leash now? No, Albing says, voice shaking. You're its counterweight. Another chain snaps. The sound booms across the sky like a funeral bell. Shen Gongbao's calm finally fractures. Enough. This ends now. He raises his hand, divine symbols igniting around his palm. Forgive me. Lady Yin screams his name. Power slams into Ne Zha's chest, invisible and crushing. The spirit pearl flares blinding white as Shen Gongbao begins the extraction ritual, ripping at the bond layer by layer. Ne Zha screams, not from pain, but from the sudden, terrifying emptiness spreading through him, like his soul is being peeled away. No! Li Jing charges forward, spear raised, but Tai Yi restrains him, face twisted with agony. If we interrupt now, the backlash will kill him instantly. Ne Zha's vision blurs. The world narrows to heat and noise, and the dragon's eyes burning closer. He feels himself slipping, fire dimming, defiance unraveling thread by thread. So this is how it ends, he thinks. Useful, convenient. Then he remembers his mother's forehead against his, the warmth, the choice. He roars. Not with power, but with refusal. Flames explode outward, not wild, but controlled, focused. The spirit pearl answers him, not the ritual, pulsing in sync with his heartbeat. For the first time, Ne Zha doesn't fight its pull. He speaks to it, not with words, with will. The extraction falters. Shen Gongbao stumbles back, shock cracking his divine composure. Impossible. You can't command it. You are the vessel. Ne Zha rises to his feet, fire reshaping around him into something new. Not chaos, not obedience, balance. Then maybe, he says, voice steady despite the storm, the vessel gets a say. The dragon pauses. Its massive head lowers, water cascading off its horns like rain. When it speaks, the sound bypasses ears entirely. Child of my heart. Ne Zha's breath catches. I won't be your key, he says, and I won't be heaven's sacrifice. The dragon studies him, ancient, endless. Then it coils, not toward him, around him. Chains snap one by one, but instead of tearing free, they fuse, wrapping dragon and boy together in blazing light. The spirit pearl lifts from Ne Zha's chest, hovering between them, splitting, rewriting itself. Tai Yi gasps. He's forging a new seal. A seal that doesn't imprison. A seal that binds by choice. The void above the clouds recoils as power surges upward, not explosive, but absolute. The dragon roars, not in triumph, but in release. For the first time in millennia, it is whole and not alone. When the light fades, the sea falls silent. Ne Zha collapses. The spirit pearl is gone. And something new burns quietly where it once was. Ne Zha doesn't wake to light. He wakes to weight. Not crushing, anchoring. His body feels heavy, like gravity finally remembered him. He opens his eyes to a sky scrubbed clean of storms, pale blue and deceptively calm. For a moment, he thinks it's over. Then he tries to move, and pain blooms, sharp and immediate, dragging a breath from his chest. Don't, Tai Yi Zhenren says quickly, kneeling beside him. His voice shakes despite the smile he forces. You're still, settling. Ne Zha swallows. His throat burns. The pearl, he croaks. Tai Yi exhales slowly. Gone. Transformed. He hesitates. So are you. Ne Zha looks down. The familiar heat is still there, but quieter, deeper, like embers banked under ash instead of wildfire. When he concentrates, he doesn't feel power spilling outward anymore. He feels resistance. A counterforce. As if something vast is leaning back against him, trusting him to hold. He knows what it is. Or who. The sea shifts. Not violently. Purposefully, a ripple spreads outward, and the Primordial Flood Dragon rises just enough for its massive silhouette to break the horizon. No chains trail from its body now. No strain. Its eyes meet Ne Zha's across the water, ancient and steady. We hold together, the voice echoes. Not aloud, but inside the space where the pearl once lived. Ne Zha's jaw tightens. So this is my life now, he murmurs. Babysitting the apocalypse. A flicker of something like amusement ripples through the dragon's presence. You chose, it replies. Ne Zha snorts weakly. Did I? Nearby, Albing kneels in the shallow water, frost receding from his skin for the first time in years. Color has returned to his face. He looks up, eyes wide, almost afraid to hope. The pressure? It's gone, he says. The ocean is calm. Shen Gongbao stands apart from them all. His golden armor is cracked now, scorched where Ne Zha's fire had surged. The divine certainty he carried earlier has fractured into something colder, sharper. Calculation. This changes nothing, he says flatly. The void still presses against the heavens. Your improvised seal is unstable. Ne Zha forces himself upright, ignoring Taiyi's protest. His legs shake, but they hold. Funny, he says, you sound worried. Shen's eyes narrow. You bound yourself to a primordial force. If you lose control, I won't, Ne Zha cuts in. The realms burn, Shen finishes. Heaven will not tolerate that risk. Li Jing steps forward, spear in hand, placing himself squarely between Shen and his son. His voice is calm, deadly calm. Then heaven will have to tolerate us. For a heartbeat, no one breathes. Shen Gongbao studies them, the father standing firm, the mother gripping Ne Zha's arm. Taiyi braced and ready, Ayu braced and ready, Ayu being rising unsteadily to his feet. Not pawns, not offerings, choices. At last, Shen lowers his hand. This isn't over, he says quietly. Heaven watches, and it will act. With that, he turns and dissolves into light, retreating upward into the clouds he came from. The silence that follows is different this time, not fearful, exhausted. Ne Zha finally lets himself sit back down. His body trembles now that the danger has passed. Lady Yin pulls him into an embrace, careful and fierce all at once. He closes his eyes, breathing her in, grounding himself in something solid and human. I'm still here, he whispers, half to her, half to himself. Night falls gently. No storms, no omens, just stars. Later, when the others sleep, Ne Zha stands alone at the shore. The dragon's presence hums quietly at the edge of his awareness, not demanding, not pulling. Waiting, he flexes his fingers, fire flickers, and then steadies. Controlled, balanced. This isn't the end of his curse, it's the beginning of his watch. Behind him, Taiyi's voice carries softly. You know what this means, don't you? Ne Zha doesn't turn. Yeah, he says. I don't get to run anymore. Taiyi shakes his head. No, you don't get to be alone anymore. Ne Zha smiles faintly, eyes on the horizon where sea meets sky. Somewhere far above, the void presses closer, testing the new seal. And Ne Zha stands ready. The world doesn't end with fire. It exhales. Weeks pass, then months. The sea holds its line, obedient not to fear, but to balance. Storms still come, but they no longer feel personal. The sky no longer watches Ne Zha like it's waiting for him to fail. He changes anyway. The boy who once burned everything he touched now wakes before dawn, standing barefoot at the shoreline, eyes closed, listening. Not to voices, to pressure, to shifts so subtle no one else could feel them. When the dragon stirs, Ne Zha steadies it. When the void presses from above, he pushes back, not with rage, but with resolve. Some days it hurts, some days he's angry all over again. But the power no longer owns him. Villagers stop whispering when he passes. Children follow him at a distance, daring each other to get closer. One day, a small girl trips near the water. Ne Zha moves without thinking, catching her before she falls. She laughs, unafraid. That moment hits harder than any curse ever did. Owl Bing visits often. The frost never fully returns to his body now. He speaks of the ocean like it's breathing easier, like it remembers itself. They don't talk much about destiny anymore. They don't need to. Heaven stays quiet. Too quiet. Taiyi knows better than to trust that silence, but even he admits the truth. Whatever Ne Zha became, it worked. The void tests the seal again and again, but it doesn't break. It adapts, learns. So does Ne Zha. On the anniversary of the storm, Shen Gongbao returns. No armor this time, no display, just a man standing at the edge of the world he once tried to control. He doesn't apologize, he doesn't threaten, he bows. Perhaps, he says carefully, we were wrong about what balance required. Ne Zha watches him, fire flickering faintly under his skin. You were wrong about choice, he replies. Shen nods once, accepting the verdict. Then he leaves, the heavens closing behind him like a door that might never fully open again. That night, Ne Zha dreams, not of chains or drowning worlds, but of standing between sky and sea, arms spread, holding two impossible forces apart with nothing but will. When he wakes, the dream doesn't fade. Years later, stories will change him again. Some will call him a guardian, others a living seal. Some will still whisper, demon. Ne Zha doesn't correct them. Labels don't matter. What matters is this: when the sea grows restless, he's there. When the sky presses too close, he stands firm. When the world tilts toward disaster, it tilts back. Not because heaven decreed it, because a boy once told fate no, and meant it. Far beneath the waves, the dragon coils peacefully, watching over him in return. And for the first time since his birth, Ne Zha smiles, not in defiance, but in peace. The first Ne Zha didn't just arrive, it detonated. In 2019, a rebellious animated firebrand tore through Chinese box offices and cultural expectations alike, announcing that domestic animation could be anarchic, emotionally raw, and commercially unstoppable all at once. That film carried the unmistakable fingerprints of its director, Yu Yang, better known as Jiaozi, an animator whose path to success was anything but traditional. A former medical student turned self-taught filmmaker, Jiaozi built Ne Zha out of persistence, long nights, and a stubborn belief that myth could be reimagined for a modern generation. Ne Zha 2, slated for 2025, exists because that belief paid off in spectacular fashion, and because the director now faces a far harder challenge than breaking in, living up to lightning. Jiaozi's creative identity has always been rooted in contradiction. He respects Chinese mythology deeply, yet refuses to treat it as untouchable scripture. The 2019 film took a familiar folkloric figure, the demon child destined to bring destruction, and reframed him as a misunderstood outcast fighting against cosmic bureaucracy and social prejudice. That wasn't a cosmetic update, it was a philosophical shift. Fate, in Jiaozi's hands, became something to argue with, not submit to. Audiences didn't just watch Ne Zha rebel, they recognized themselves in that defiance. That emotional alignment explains why the original film didn't merely succeed, it became a generational touchstone. So why return? Because Ne Zha wasn't designed as a one-off spectacle. From the beginning, Jiaozi approached the story as part of a broader mythological universe, one where gods behave badly, heroes are deeply flawed, and destiny is less prophecy than provocation. Ne Zha 2 emerges from that worldview. The sequel isn't about repeating the same beats louder and bigger, it's about escalation of consequence. The first film asked whether fate could be challenged. The second inevitably has to ask what happens after you succeed. Rebellion is exhilarating. Living with its aftermath is harder. Early signals from the project suggest that Jiaozi remains firmly in control creatively, continuing his preference for hands-on involvement in story, tone, and animation oversight. That matters. Large-scale sequels often fracture under committee decision-making, smoothing away the jagged edges that made the original special. Jiaozi's strength has always been his refusal to sand those edges down. His humor skews dark, his emotions land messy, his characters lash out, fail, sulk, and occasionally behave like children with too much power because that's exactly what they are. Preserving that sensibility in a sequel with vastly higher expectations is the real test. The creative genesis of Ne Zha 2 is also inseparable from the shifting landscape of Chinese animation. Since 2019, the industry has evolved rapidly, with studios investing more aggressively in original IP rooted in local mythology rather than Western imitation. That puts Jiaozi in a strange position. He's no longer the insurgent proving something can work. He's now a standard bearer. Others are chasing. The sequel carries that weight. Every stylistic choice, every narrative risk will be read not just as a creative decision, but as a signal for where the industry might go next. Visually, expectations are almost unfair. The first film's animation style, elastic character designs, explosive action choreography, and expressive facial work helped redefine what mainstream Chinese animation could look like. Ne Zha 2 has to advance that language without losing its soul. Bigger budgets can buy more render power and polish, but they can't automatically recreate personality. Jiaozi's challenge is to ensure that scale enhances intimacy rather than drowning it. Ne Zha works because his tantrums feel personal, not because the explosions are loud. There's also a tonal balancing act at the heart of the sequel's conception. The original film thrived on its blend of irreverent comedy and genuine tragedy. One minute it was mocking divine hierarchies. The next, it was confronting parental fear and societal rejection with surprising tenderness. That tonal agility is hard to replicate twice. Lean too far into comedy and the stakes evaporate. Lean too far into darkness, and you lose the anarchic joy that defined Ne Zha's personality. Jiaozi's vision hinges on keeping both alive, letting humor coexist with consequence. At its core, Ne Zha 2 exists because its director believes mythology should evolve alongside the people who inherit it. Jiaozi doesn't treat legends as moral instruction manuals. He treats them as raw material for asking uncomfortable questions about identity, control, and freedom. The sequel's creative genesis is less about expanding a franchise and more about continuing an argument with destiny that the first film only began. and that makes it far more interesting than a simple victory lap. But vision alone doesn't make a sequel work. The ideas still have to survive the writing process, the hardest part of all, and that's where the real battle for Ne Zha 2 begins. The moment Ne Zha proved it could punch holes through destiny itself, the sequel inherited a dangerous question. Where does the story go when fate has already been defied? That question haunted the writing process of Ne Zha 2. Sequels live or die on script, not spectacle, and Zhao understood that repeating the original's beats, angry child, cosmic injustice, explosive catharsis, would feel hollow. The writing had to grow up, even if its heroes still hadn't, and that growth begins with rethinking the very rules the first film smashed. Unlike many animated franchises that outsource their sequels to safer hands, Ne Zha 2 continues to be developed under Zhao close narrative supervision. His relationship with the screenplay has always been personal. He doesn't treat scripts as blueprints to be efficiently executed. He treats them as battlegrounds where theme, tone, and character wrestle for dominance. Development reportedly stretched over several years, not because the studio hesitated, but because the story resisted easy answers. The first film asked whether destiny is real. The sequel has to confront something messier, responsibility. Structurally, the writing moves away from the clean inevitability of origin storytelling. Origin stories have momentum baked in. You know the hero will awaken, fall, and rise. Ne Zha 2 doesn't have that safety net. Its narrative architecture leans toward consequence-driven storytelling, where choices made earlier ripple outward in uncomfortable ways. Ne Zha's rebellion didn't dismantle the system, it exposed it. The script reportedly builds tension not from prophecy, but from fallout-fractured alliances, shaken divine hierarchies, and a world that no longer knows how to categorize a boy who slipped through destiny's fingers. Dialogue has always been one of the franchise's sharpest tools, and the writing here doubles down on that edge. The first film's humor worked because it sounded modern without feeling lazy. Slang inflected, sarcastic, occasionally crude, but always character-driven. Ne Zha 2 keeps that voice, yet tempers it with moments of unsettling quiet. Characters speak less when certainty evaporates. Gods hesitate, parents falter. Ne Zha himself, once a walking tantrum, begins to weaponize silence. When he does speak, it lands heavier, not because the lines are grand, but because they arrive after restraint. One of the screenplay's boldest choices lies in how it treats antagonism. The first film had a clear cosmic villain, fate itself, embodied through heavenly systems and rigid moral bookkeeping. The sequel reportedly fractures that opposition. Conflict becomes ideological rather than singular. Different characters want incompatible versions of order, and none of them are purely wrong. That's a risky move for an animated blockbuster, especially one courting younger audiences. Moral ambiguity doesn't sell toys easily, but it does deepen narrative resonance, and the writers lean into that discomfort rather than sanding it down. Adaptationally, Ne Zha 2 continues to draw from classical Chinese mythology while refusing literalism. Characters and events are inspired by legend, not enslaved to it. This approach gives the screenplay flexibility to surprise audiences who think they know where the story is headed. Familiar mythological figures may appear, but rarely as expected. Roles blur. Archetypes fracture. The writing uses myth as a shared cultural language, then twists its grammar. You recognize the words. The sentences still shock. Pacing posed another major script challenge. The original film benefited from a tight emotional arc and escalating stakes that naturally accelerated toward its climax. A sequel risks bloat. Too many characters, too many subplots, too much universe building. The Ne Zha 2 screenplay reportedly counters this by anchoring every narrative thread back to Ne Zha's internal conflict. Even large-scale set pieces are motivated by character tension rather than spectacle obligation. Action isn't there to impress. It's there because someone made a choice they can't undo. Perhaps the most intriguing element of the writing is its refusal to provide easy catharsis. The first film earned its emotional release through defiance and sacrifice. The sequel complicates that release. Victories feel conditional. Triumph carries cost. The script resists the urge to reassure the audience that everything will be fine simply because the hero is charismatic. That restraint suggests a confidence rarely seen in animated sequels, a trust that viewers can handle unresolved emotions and lingering questions. All of this makes the screenplay of Ne Zha 2 less about escalation and more about evolution. Louder isn't the goal, deeper is. The writers understand that rebellion is thrilling, but living in a world after rebellion is where real drama lives. That thematic pivot defines the script's ambition and sets the stage for the next crucial step, finding voices capable of carrying this heavier, more complex story. Because on paper, the characters may have grown. On screen, they still need performers who can make that growth feel real. Casting an animated sequel sounds deceptively simple. Keep the same voices, record new lines, move on. Ne Zha 2 makes that assumption look naive. Voice casting here isn't maintenance, it's recalibration. The characters have changed, the emotional temperature has shifted, and performances that once thrived on raw chaos now need greater control. The casting process had to account for that evolution, because voices don't just deliver dialogue and animation, they become the performance. At the center of it all is Ne Zha himself. In the first film, the character's defining traits were volatility and impulse. The voice performance leaned hard into sharp edges, snarling defiance one second, wounded vulnerability the next. That worked because Ne Zha was a bomb waiting to go off. The sequel demands something trickier. He's still dangerous, still emotionally unfiltered, but now he carries awareness, guilt, memory. The casting decision to retain the original voice actor wasn't about brand continuity, it was about trust. Trust that the performer could age the voice psychologically without losing its feral spark. That's a subtle craft challenge. You can't simply deepen the tone or slow the delivery. The shift happens in micro-choices. Pauses held a beat longer, anger that coils instead of explodes, sarcasm that feels defensive rather than playful. Early test recordings reportedly focused less on volume and more on restraint, pushing the actor to convey power without shouting. When Ne Zha loses his temper now, it's more frightening precisely because it feels deliberate. Awakens' casting continuity carries a different weight. Where Ne Zha embodies chaos, Awakens has always represented suppressed emotion and inherited expectation. His voice performance in the first film was controlled, almost fragile, a study in quiet pressure. In Ne Zha 2, that pressure doesn't disappear, it mutates. Keeping the same actor allows the sequel to track that evolution with precision. The calm cracks, certainty wavers, and the voice, once serene, starts to carry friction. You hear it before you fully register it. Returning adult characters required equally careful consideration. Ne Zha's parents, especially, occupy a more complicated emotional space this time. In the original film, they were anchors, sources of unconditional love in a hostile world. The sequel places strain on that dynamic. Parenting a child who defied destiny is different from protecting one crushed by it. Casting stability here wasn't optional. Familiar voices provide emotional continuity, allowing the script to explore tension without alienating the audience. When a parent hesitates, that hesitation lands harder because you recognize the voice that once sounded unwavering. New characters pose the real casting puzzle. Ne Zha 2 introduces figures who don't fit neatly into hero or villain categories, mythological entities with competing philosophies rather than obvious malice. Casting leaned toward performers known for vocal nuance rather than bombast. The goal wasn't intimidation, it was persuasion. These characters don't want to destroy Ne Zha, they want to define him. That distinction shapes performance style. Calm voices, measured delivery, authority conveyed through certainty, not volume. Chemistry testing played an unusually prominent role for an animated production. Zhaozi's team reportedly prioritized group recording sessions where possible, encouraging actors to react to one another in real time rather than recording in isolation. That choice reflects a belief that tension emerges organically through interaction, not just writing. You can hear it when characters interrupt each other, talk over one another, or hesitate mid-line because someone else's words landed unexpectedly. Those imperfections create life. There's also a notable resistance to stunt casting. With the franchise's success, the temptation to bring in celebrity voices for marketing appeal must have been strong. The casting philosophy rejected that shortcut. Recognition wasn't the priority, credibility was. A famous voice that pulls you out of the story does more harm than good, especially in a mythological world that relies on immersion. The performances needed to disappear into the characters, not advertise themselves. One of the more interesting behind-the-scenes dynamics involves directing actors through tonal ambiguity. Animation voice work often exaggerates emotion for clarity. Ne Zha 2 does the opposite in key moments. Actors were reportedly directed to underplay scenes, trusting the animation and music to carry what the voice withholds. That restraint signals confidence in the collaborative process and in the audience's ability to read subtext. By the time casting locked, Ne Zha 2 had assembled a vocal ensemble capable of handling contradiction, humor without flippancy, intensity without melodrama, authority without caricature. These aren't just voices filling roles, they're performances designed to age alongside the story. And once the casting is right, the real test begins, seeing whether those voices can sustain emotional weight across entire arcs, scene by scene, breath by breath. That's where performance stops being theoretical and starts being visceral. The difference between a good animated character and a great one isn't design or dialogue, it's performance. And Ne Zha 2 lives or dies on whether its lead performances can carry a story that's heavier, quieter, and far less forgiving than before. The first film thrived on raw emotional combustion, tantrums, screams, tears that arrive like grenades. This sequel demands something harder: control, power held back, emotion filtered through experience. And that shift turns the voice performances from expressive fireworks into something closer to sustained dramatic acting. Ne Zha's arc is no longer about being hated for what he might become. It's about living with what he's already done. That change reshapes every line delivery. Where the original performance was all sharp edges, mockery masking pain, fury erupting without warning, the sequel introduces deliberation. You hear it immediately. Ne Zha doesn't rush his words anymore. He lets them sit. Sometimes he doesn't speak at all. Silence becomes part of the performance, and that's a dangerous tool in animation. Used poorly, it feels empty. Used well, it vibrates with intention. Listen to how anger functions now. Before, it was reflexive. Someone provokes him, he explodes. In Ne Zha 2, anger coils. The actor holds back, compresses rage into clipped phrasing, then releases it sparingly. When Ne Zha finally lashes out, it feels earned and unsettling. This isn't a child throwing a fit. This is someone who knows exactly how much damage he can do. That awareness changes everything. It turns power into burden, and the performance carries that weight without ever announcing it. There's a crucial emotional recalibration in how vulnerability is played. The first film externalized Ne Zha's pain through confrontation. He fought because fighting was the only language he trusted. The sequel internalizes that pain. Vulnerability now surfaces in quieter moments, hesitation before a decision, a joke that lands flat, a line delivered with forced bravado that collapses halfway through. These are not big acting beats, they're precise ones. Miss them and the character flattens. Hit them and suddenly Ne Zha feels older without ever needing to say so. Ao Bing's performance operates on a different axis, and that contrast remains one of the franchise's smartest choices. If Ne Zha is about barely contained energy, Ao Bing is about pressure. His voice performance in the sequel deepens that tension rather than releasing it. Calm is no longer comfort, it's strain. The actor introduces subtle roughness into what was once pristine control. Certain words catch in the throat. Breaths linger just a fraction too long. You feel the cost of composure. Their shared scenes are where both performances truly ignite. Chemistry in animation is notoriously difficult to achieve because actors often record separately. Here, that barrier dissolves. Timing matters. Interruptions matter. The way one voice overlaps another creates friction that no line reading alone could generate. Ne Zha pushes. Ao Bing resists. Then roles reverse. The performances play like a negotiation rather than a clash, and that dynamic evolution sells the sequel's thematic ambition more than any exposition ever could. Parental performances deserve special attention, particularly Ne Zha's mother. In the original film, her role was defined by fierce protection and unwavering belief. That clarity fractures in Ne Zha 2. Love remains, but certainty does not. The voice performance reflects that shift with devastating subtlety. Strength is still there, but it trembles. Lines that would once have been delivered with confidence now arrive layered with doubt, sometimes trailing off rather than landing cleanly. That hesitation hurts more than any shouted fear. It sounds like a parent realizing that love can't solve everything. Ne Zha's father operates in a different register, stoic, restrained, emotionally armored. His performance remains measured, but the cracks widen. The actor doesn't change volume or tone drastically. Instead, he alters rhythm. Pauses grow longer, responses come slower. Authority no longer feels absolute. In animation, these choices are microscopic, but they ripple outward. You don't need a speech explaining parental anxiety. You hear it breathing between words. New characters bring fresh performance textures into the mix, and this is where Ne Zha 2 avoids a common sequel trap. Rather than escalating villainy through louder, more theatrical performances, the film opts for restraint. Authority figures speak softly. Antagonistic forces sound reasonable. That's far more unsettling. The actors convey conviction without cruelty, making opposition feel ideological rather than monstrous. You don't hate these characters, you understand them. And that understanding complicates every conflict they touch. One standout element across all lead performances is the refusal to overplay humor. The franchise's comedic DNA remains intact, but the timing shifts. Jokes land quicker. Punchlines sometimes die deliberately. Laughter catches in the throat. The actors understand that comedy now serves tension rather than releasing it. A sarcastic remark becomes defensive armor. A joke that doesn't quite land exposes insecurity. That balance keeps the film from drowning in its own seriousness while still respecting its emotional stakes. Perhaps the most impressive achievement of the lead performances is their consistency across the entire runtime. Animation often front-loads emotional effort, saving energy for climactic moments. Ne Zha 2 sustains intensity. Performances don't spike, they simmer. By the time the emotional peaks arrive, the groundwork has already been laid. When characters finally break, it feels inevitable rather than manipulative. This is where voice acting transcends technical execution and becomes dramatic craft. The actors aren't just matching mouth movements or hitting emotional markers. They're tracking internal arcs, how a character feels before a line, during it, and after it lands. That continuity creates the illusion of inner life, which is the highest compliment you can give in animated performance. And yet, no performance exists in isolation. These leads shine because they're supported, challenged, and occasionally outshone by the ensemble around them. Scene stealers lurk in the margins, waiting for their moment to tilt the balance. That's where the story turns next, toward the supporting cast that gives this world its texture, tension, and surprising emotional depth. Great animated films are remembered for their heroes. Great animated worlds are remembered for everyone else. Ne Zha 2 understands that distinction, and its supporting cast doesn't just fill narrative space, it actively reshapes it. These characters don't orbit the leads politely. They interrupt, provoke, destabilize. Sometimes they steal the scene outright. And that ensemble energy is exactly what keeps the sequel from collapsing into a two-character philosophical duel. One of the most effective choices here is how supporting characters are allowed to disagree with the leads without being framed as obstacles to overcome. In many sequels, secondary figures exist to validate the hero's journey. Ne Zha 2 resists that impulse. Allies challenge Ne Zha. Authority figures undermine him indirectly. Even moments of support arrive laced with conditions. The performances reflect this complexity. No one sounds like they're reading from the same moral script, and that friction gives the world texture. Take the elder figures within the celestial hierarchy. These characters could have been caricatures, booming voices, exaggerated menace, obvious villain coding. Instead, the performances lean into restraint, calm voices, patient phrasing, confidence delivered without volume. These aren't gods who need to shout. They believe they're right. That certainty is what makes them dangerous. When they speak, it feels like policy being enacted, not anger being vented. The ensemble benefits enormously from this choice because it forces the audience to listen rather than react. Then there are the mythological side characters, figures drawn from familiar legends but reframed with modern sensibilities. Their performances inject tonal variety into the film. Some lean toward dry humor, others bring weary cynicism. A few operate on quiet melancholy. None of them feel interchangeable. Each voice carries a distinct rhythm, allowing even brief appearances to register. When one of these characters exits the frame, you feel the absence. Not because the plot demands it, but because the presence was specific. Comic relief, often the downfall of animated sequels, is handled with unusual discipline. Supporting characters still deliver humor, but rarely in isolation. Jokes are embedded in relationships rather than monologues. A sarcastic aside lands because of who hears it. A visual gag works because of how another character reacts vocally. Performances don't chase laughs, they stumble into them. That restraint keeps comedy from undercutting tension and allows humor to coexist with dread. One particularly effective ensemble dynamic emerges in group scenes, where multiple supporting characters share space with the leads. These moments could have turned chaotic. Instead, the voice direction emphasizes contrast. Different speech patterns overlap without blending together. One character interrupts aggressively. Another waits, then punctures the conversation with a single line. Someone else stays silent until silence itself becomes commentary. These choices make group interactions feel lived in rather than orchestrated. What's striking is how often supporting performances subtly reframe Ne Zha himself. Around some characters, he sounds defensive. Around others, performative. Around a few, unexpectedly small. That elasticity reveals different facets of his personality without requiring exposition. The ensemble becomes a mirror, reflecting versions of Ne Zha he doesn't always recognize. That's sophisticated character work achieved almost entirely through vocal interplay. Parental adjacent figures outside Ne Zha's immediate family also play a crucial role. These characters embody alternative philosophies of care, control, and responsibility. Their performances are intentionally measured, almost instructional. They don't raise their voices because they don't need to. They assume authority. When Ne Zha pushes back, the contrast between his volatility and her composure sharpens the thematic conflict. Freedom versus order. Instinct versus structure. The ensemble doesn't explain these ideas. They perform them. Even minor roles are treated with respect. Messengers, guards, bystanders, characters who might exist for seconds still receive performances with intent. A fearful pause here. A skeptical inflection there. These details accumulate. The world feels populated, not staged. And that density matters in a sequel expanding its scope. Bigger worlds demand more voices. Ne Zha 2 gives them character rather than noise. What ultimately elevates the ensemble is how little it begs for attention. There's no sense of actors trying to steal focus or announce importance. Scene stealing happens organically when a line lands harder than expected or a reaction lingers a beat too long. Those moments feel discovered rather than engineered. And discovery is always more satisfying than display. By the time the film settles into its later movements, the supporting cast has done its job quietly and effectively. Stakes feel real because perspectives are plural. Conflicts resonate because solutions aren't unanimous. The world pushes back against the hero, not out of cruelty, but out of competing belief. That resistance gives the story weight, and once a world feels real, the next question becomes inevitable. How was it built? Not emotionally, but physically. The spaces these characters inhabit, the textures, colors, and environments that frame every interaction carry meaning of their own. That's where the film's visual craftsmanship steps forward, turning mythology into architecture. World-building in Ne Zha 2 doesn't announce itself. It persuades you quietly, detail by detail, until the environment feels inevitable rather than designed. The production design carries enormous responsibility here, because this sequel expands the mythological canvas without losing the intimacy that grounded the first film. Bigger worlds are easy to draw. Meaningful ones are not. The visual craftsmanship succeeds because it understands that space is narrative. Every texture, color, and architectural choice reflecting the story's evolving psychology. The most immediate shift lies in scale. The original Ne Zha balanced intimate domestic spaces against grand celestial arenas, using contrast to highlight how small Ne Zha felt within cosmic systems. Ne Zha 2 complicates that language. Domestic spaces grow heavier, more constrained. Celestial environments become colder, more bureaucratic. The design doesn't just expand outward, it tightens inward. Homes no longer feel purely safe. Divine realms no longer feel awe-inspiring. That inversion subtly reinforces the sequel's thematic turn from rebellion to consequence. Production design leans heavily on material storytelling. Walls are no longer pristine. Surfaces carry wear cracks, scorches, weathering that suggest history rather than spectacle. This is a world that remembers what happened in the first film. Destruction leaves residue. Power leaves scars. Even fantastical environments feel grounded because they show evidence of use, conflict, and neglect. That tactile realism anchors the mythology in something emotionally legible. Color palette plays a crucial role in guiding perception. The sequel moves away from the first film's more playful saturation toward a palette that feels denser and moodier. Reds still dominate Ne Zha's visual identity, but they're deeper now. Less flame, more ember. Blues surrounding Aobing grow darker, colder, edged with steel rather than serenity. Neutral tones creep into divine spaces, draining warmth from places once framed as righteous. Color becomes moral temperature, shifting as alliances and beliefs fracture. Costume design does just as much character work as dialogue. Ne Zha's attire evolves subtly rather than dramatically. He doesn't suddenly look like a different person. Instead, familiar elements gain weight-thicker materials, sharper lines, fewer loose details. Chaos is still present, but it's contained. Bing's costuming mirrors his internal tension, maintaining elegance while introducing rigidity. Flow gives way to structure. Movement feels restricted, even when he's still. Authority figures are costumed with deliberate restraint. No excessive ornamentation, no flamboyant power signaling. Their designs favor symmetry, muted tones, and clean lines, visual order incarnate. This isn't accidental. The production design frames authority as calm, controlled, and suffocating. Power doesn't shout here, it stands still and expects compliance. That visual language makes rebellion feel inherently disruptive, even before a single word is spoken. Set design also emphasizes verticality in new ways. The first film often framed Ne Zha in wide spaces that emphasized his isolation. The sequel traps characters within towering structures, corridors that narrow as they rise, platforms suspended over voids. Upward movement feels oppressive rather than liberating. Ascension becomes burden. Descent becomes escape. These spatial metaphors operate subconsciously, guiding emotional response without calling attention to themselves. Props carry narrative weight as well. Objects introduced casually often resurface with altered meaning. A familiar weapon feels heavier in hand. A symbolic artifact loses its sheen. Tools once associated with protection become instruments of control. The design team treats props as emotional anchors rather than decorative elements. When a character touches something, it matters. History hums beneath the gesture. Environmental storytelling reaches its peak in transitional spaces, bridges, thresholds, gateways between realms. These areas are designed with visual tension, combining elements from both worlds without fully belonging to either. Materials clash, colors compete. Geometry destabilizes. Characters linger here longer than expected, and the reason is clear: these spaces embody indecision. They're places where choices crystallize. The production design makes you feel that weight before the script ever spells it out. What's most impressive is how restraint governs spectacle. Yes, Ne Zha 2 delivers scale. Massive environments unfold, mythological architecture stretches toward the sublime. But spectacle never arrives without context. Visual grandeur is always tethered to emotional stakes. The world doesn't expand for novelty, it expands because the story demands it. That discipline keeps the film grounded even as it reaches for the mythic. By the time the film moves toward its more confrontational sequences, the environments feel complicit in the drama. Spaces pressure characters, colors accuse them, architecture confines or exposes them. Production design stops being background and becomes participant. The world pushes back. And once the physical world is fully realized, the next layer of visual storytelling takes over: how that world is seen. Framing, movement, light. The camera's eye shapes meaning just as much as the sets themselves. That's where the film's visual language truly asserts itself. The moment Ne Zha 2 begins to move, you feel it. Not just action, but intention. Cinematography here isn't about prettiness or scale. It's about control, about deciding when the audience is allowed to breathe and when that breath is taken away. Animated films often treat the camera as invisible, a neutral observer floating wherever the action needs it. This sequel does the opposite. The camera has opinions, and those opinions shape how the story lands. The most striking evolution from the first film is restraint, where Ne Zha 2019 embraced kinetic chaos whip pans, exaggerated motion, explosive framing. Ne Zha 2 slows the language down. Shots linger. Movements feel weighted. The virtual camera behaves less like a spectator at a fireworks show and more like a witness who understands consequences. That shift immediately signals maturity. This is no longer a story rushing toward destiny. It's one circling it cautiously. Framing choices do heavy thematic lifting. Ne Zha is often boxed in now, framed by doorways, pillars, collapsing geometry. Even in wide shots, negative space presses inward rather than opening up. The world feels tighter around him, and the camera reinforces that sensation relentlessly. Contrast that with Bing, who is frequently framed symmetrically, centered within the image. Order surrounds him, but that order becomes suffocating. Perfect balance starts to look like a cage. Camera movement tells its own emotional story. When Ne Zha loses control, the camera doesn't spin wildly anymore. It tracks him with eerie smoothness, gliding alongside destruction rather than reacting to it. That calm is unsettling. Violence feels intentional, not accidental. In moments of introspection, the camera barely moves at all, forcing the audience to sit with discomfort rather than escaping through motion. Stillness becomes confrontation. Lighting design deepens this psychological tension. The film leans heavily into directional lighting, strong sources carving faces into planes of light and shadow. Ne Zha's scenes often feature uneven illumination, light breaking across him in fragments. He's never fully lit, never fully obscured. Ao Bing, by contrast, is frequently bathed in cool, even light that flattens texture. It's visually calming and emotionally distancing. Light becomes a moral language, shaping how we read each character before they speak. Action sequences deserve special attention, not for their scale, but for their clarity. Animated action can easily dissolve into visual noise. Ne Zha 2 avoids that trap through disciplined composition. Every strike has direction. Every collision has spatial logic. The camera prioritizes readability over frenzy. You always know where you are, who's where, and why movement matters. That clarity makes the action hit harder because you understand the cost of every blow. One particularly effective technique is the use of delayed impact. The camera often lingers a beat longer than expected after a strike or explosion, holding on the aftermath rather than the act itself. Dust settles, energy dissipates. Characters register what just happened. That pause transforms spectacle into consequence. You're not just watching power, you're watching what power leaves behind. Depth of field, often overlooked in animation, becomes a storytelling tool here. Foreground elements frequently intrude into frame-blurred shapes, partial obstructions, creating layers that imply surveillance or constraint. Characters are watched, judged, framed within systems larger than themselves. When the background snaps into focus, it often reveals something ominous waiting patiently. The image itself feels complicit in the pressure. The film also uses scale dynamically rather than statically. Characters don't remain small against large environments for visual awe alone. Scale shifts within scenes. A towering figure looms. Then the camera lowers, leveling the field. Or a character shrinks visually as the environment asserts dominance. These shifts mirror power dynamics in real time. Authority isn't fixed, it's negotiated shot by shot. Color grading works hand in hand with camera language. Warmth drains from the image as certainty erodes. Cooler tones creep in during moments of moral rigidity. When warmth returns, it feels earned and fleeting. The cinematography refuses comfort as a default state. It makes you work for it. What truly distinguishes Ne Zha 2 is how invisible this sophistication feels. The film never stops to show off its technique. You don't notice the camera making clever choices. You feel the emotional result of those choices. Tension builds. Unease settles. Moments linger longer than expected. That's cinematography doing its job. By the time the film reaches its most visually ambitious passages, the groundwork has already been laid. The audience trusts the image, trusts the camera, trusts that what they're being shown matters. And that trust allows the next layer of storytelling to land with full force. Because once the eye is fully engaged, the ear takes over. Sound, music, silence. They don't accompany the images. They interrogate them. And that's where Ne Zha 2 deepens its grip. Sound is where Ne Zha 2 becomes intimate. Images establish scale, but audio decides how close you feel to the characters while that scale looms overhead. This sequel understands that music and sound design aren't decorative layers. They're emotional narrators. Sometimes they guide you gently, sometimes they lie, and sometimes they vanish altogether, leaving silence to do the damage. The score builds on the musical identity of the first film while deliberately refusing to repeat it wholesale. Familiar motifs resurface, but they're altered, slowed, fragmented, occasionally stripped down to skeletal versions of themselves. A theme that once surged with youthful defiance now returns weighted with minor key unease. Memory lingers in the music, just as it does in the characters. You recognize the melody, but it no longer feels safe. Ne Zha's musical presence undergoes the most striking transformation. In the original film, his themes were explosive, percussive, aggressive, charged with momentum. Here, those elements remain, but they're restrained. Drums hit less often. When they do, they land heavier. Space opens between notes, creating tension through anticipation rather than release. The score mirrors Ne Zha's internal state, Power still there, but carefully rationed. Ao Bing's musical language evolves in parallel. His earlier themes lean toward elegance and melancholy, carried by flowing lines and cooler tonal colors. In Ne Zha 2, those melodies harden. Sustained notes stretch longer, almost to the point of discomfort. Harmonies tighten. Beauty starts to feel rigid. The music communicates what the character doesn't say. That serenity maintained through pressure eventually cracks. One of the boldest choices lies in the use of silence. Not the absence of sound, but the removal of score at moments where you expect it most. Climactic confrontations often arrive without musical cueing, leaving only environmental sound breathing, shifting fabric, distant echoes. Without music to guide emotion, the audience has nowhere to hide. You feel exposed alongside the characters. Silence becomes judgment. Sound design fills that silence with texture rather than noise. Every environment breathes. Wind doesn't just pass, it presses. Flames don't roar constantly, they snap, hiss, recede. Energy crackles with uneven rhythm. These details ground the fantastical elements in physical sensation. You don't just see power, you hear its instability. Diegetic sound plays an unusually prominent role. Objects hum, artifacts resonate faintly when handled. Architecture responds to presence with subtle creaks or tonal shifts. These sounds exist within the world, not above it, reinforcing the idea that power leaves acoustic fingerprints wherever it moves. When a character enters a charged space, the soundscape changes before the visuals do. Your body registers danger ahead of your mind. Dialogue mixing deserves quiet praise. Voices sit naturally within the environment rather than floating above it. Characters raise their voices only when emotionally necessary, not because the mix demands clarity. Whispered lines remain whispers. When someone speaks softly in a vast space, you strain to hear them, and that effort creates intimacy. The film trusts its audience to lean in. Action sequences use sound sparingly for maximum impact. Instead of constant sonic assault, effects are staggered. A burst of noise followed by sudden quiet. Impact followed by echo rather than continuous bombardment. This rhythm prevents fatigue and keeps stakes legible. You don't tune out, you brace yourself. One particularly effective technique is the manipulation of expectation. A musical swell begins, then cuts off abruptly. A familiar theme threatens to return, then dissolves into ambient tone. These interruptions destabilize emotional prediction. You stop anticipating catharsis and start fearing interruption. That tension aligns perfectly with the sequel's thematic refusal to offer easy release. Choral elements are used with surgical precision. When they appear, they don't signal divinity or triumph. They sound distant, detached, almost indifferent. The heavens don't sing for heroes here, they observe. That choice reframes the cosmic scale of the story, turning what could have been inspirational into something unsettling. By the film's later passages, music and sound operate less as accompaniment and more as internal monologue. They echo what characters feel but cannot articulate. When Ne Zha hesitates, the score thins. When Ao Bing hardens, harmonies constrict. When authority asserts itself, sound stabilizes unnaturally, smoothing out chaos until it feels oppressive. What makes Ne Zha 2's audio landscape so effective is confidence. The film doesn't fear quiet. It doesn't fear ambiguity. It allows sound to withdraw when withdrawal says more than emphasis ever could. That restraint elevates every moment where music does surge, because those moments feel earned rather than expected. And behind all of this sonic precision lies a production journey that wasn't nearly as controlled as the finished product suggests. Because getting this level of cohesion across sound, image, and performance requires navigating chaos behind the scenes. That's where the real story waits. By the time Ne Zha 2 reaches the screen, it looks controlled, deliberate, almost serene in its confidence. The truth behind the scenes was anything but. This production didn't glide forward on momentum from the first film. It wrestled its way there. Success buys resources, not certainty. And the sequel's journey was defined by constant recalibration, creative pressure, and a director unwilling to take the easy road just because it was available. One of the earliest challenges emerged before animation pipelines even locked: time. Expectations were enormous, both commercially and culturally. Rushing the sequel would have guaranteed box office returns, but it risked hollowing out the soul that made the original resonate. Zhao pushed back hard against accelerated schedules, reportedly insisting on extended development and iteration phases. That decision slowed production considerably and quietly raised stakes. Delays invite scrutiny. Scrutiny invites doubt. The team chose patience anyway. Animation itself became a battlefield between ambition and feasibility. The visual complexity of Ne Zha 2 exceeds its predecessor across nearly every dimension. Denser environments, more nuanced character acting, heavier effects, integration. Each improvement multiplied workload exponentially. Scenes that would have been straightforward in the first film required layers of revision here. Facial animation alone went through multiple passes to preserve micro-expressions without slipping into artificial smoothness. Too polished and emotion vanished. Too rough and credibility collapsed. Remote collaboration added another layer of difficulty. Portions of production unfolded during periods of disrupted workflows, forcing teams to coordinate across locations rather than sharing physical studio space. Animation thrives on immediacy. Walking over to someone's desk, sketching a solution, testing an idea in real time. That spontaneity had to be rebuilt digitally. Feedback loops stretched, revisions stacked. The production survived because leadership emphasized clarity over speed, even when that meant living with uncertainty longer than anyone wanted. Voice recording schedules posed their own complications. Because performances were so tightly intertwined with animation, lines couldn't simply be recorded once and forgotten. Actors were brought back repeatedly as scenes evolved. Dialogue shifted. Emotional emphasis changed. Some sequences were reanimated to match a vocal inflection discovered late in the process. That level of responsiveness is rare and expensive, but it preserved the film's emotional continuity. Performance drove animation, not the other way around. There were moments when scale threatened to overwhelm story. Large set pieces ballooned in complexity, prompting internal debates about restraint. Should this sequence grow bigger, louder, more impressive, or should it pull back? Zhao Zi reportedly intervened repeatedly, cutting or simplifying visuals that distracted from character focus. That kind of decision is unpopular in the moment. Teams fall in love with their work. Letting go hurts. But those cuts preserved the film's spine. Not everything went according to plan. Certain technical experiments failed outright. Lighting models that looked stunning in isolation clashed disastrously with character palettes. Particle effects intended to enhance power instead muddied clarity. Entire approaches were abandoned after months of effort. These weren't quiet setbacks, they were painful. But the production culture treated failure as information rather than embarrassment. What didn't work was dissected, not buried. On set, or rather, in the virtual equivalent. Zhao Zi's directing style proved decisive. He's known for precision, but also for openness. Animators and designers were encouraged to challenge ideas, provided they could defend alternatives. That environment produced tension, but also breakthroughs. Some of the film's most striking visual moments reportedly emerged from junior artists questioning assumptions rather than executing instructions blindly. Hierarchy existed, but curiosity mattered more. There were lighter moments, too. Extended production breeds camaraderie out of necessity. Teams bonded over shared frustration, late nights, and the strange intimacy of collectively obsessing over fictional characters. Running jokes emerged around particularly stubborn scenes. Small victories were celebrated loudly. These human moments don't appear on screen, but they leave residue. Films made under purely transactional conditions rarely feel this alive. As deadlines approached, pressure intensified. Marketing timelines don't bend easily, and release windows close whether a film feels ready or not. The final stretch involved brutal prioritization, deciding where perfection mattered and where good enough would suffice. Not every corner could be polished endlessly. Knowing where to stop is its own art. The team chose consistency over excess, cohesion over flourish. When Ne Zha 2 finally locked, it carried the marks of that journey. Not scars, strength. The film feels considered because it was tested. It feels confident because it survived doubt. Behind every smooth sequence lies a mess of discarded versions, arguments, revisions, and hard calls. That's not a flaw, that's craftsmanship. And once the film left the studio, another trial awaited. One measured not in frames or notes, but in numbers. Because no matter how personal the journey, this sequel entered a marketplace with expectations written in bold ink. That's where the story turns next. Success creates momentum. Momentum creates expectation. And expectation is ruthless. Ne Zha 2 didn't enter the marketplace as just another animated sequel. It arrived carrying the weight of a phenomenon. The first film didn't merely perform well. It redefined what a domestically produced animated feature could achieve in China. That legacy shaped every conversation around the sequel's commercial prospects long before tickets ever went on sale. What's crucial to understand is that Ne Zha 2 was never judged by ordinary benchmarks. A strong opening, by typical standards, wouldn't be enough. Anything less than dominance would be framed as disappointment, regardless of profitability. That's the paradox of runaway success. It recalibrates the scale against which you're measured. The sequel wasn't competing with other animated films, it was competing with its own shadow. From a commercial strategy perspective, confidence was unmistakable. The release positioning leaned into event status rather than cautious rollout. This wasn't treated as niche animation or family-only fare. Marketing emphasized scale, emotional weight, and mythological gravity, signaling that the film belonged in the same cultural conversation as live-action blockbusters. That framing mattered. The original Ne Zha succeeded partly because it attracted audiences far beyond children. The sequel doubled down on that cross-generational appeal. Audience anticipation functioned as its own form of marketing. Years of discussion, speculation, and expectation built a foundation that no advertising budget could replicate. The franchise had already embedded itself into popular culture references, memes, and character iconography circulating organically. By the time promotional material surfaced, awareness wasn't the challenge. Managing expectation was. Opening performance became less about curiosity and more about loyalty. Viewers weren't asking, "What is this?" They were asking, "Did they get it right?" That distinction shapes box office behavior in subtle ways. Initial turnout reflects trust. Sustained performance reflects satisfaction. For a sequel like Ne Zha 2, long-term legs mattered more than explosive novelty. Merchandising and ancillary revenue streams played a significant role in the film's commercial ecosystem. Ne Zha isn't just a character, he's a brand one rooted in rebellion, attitude, and iconography that translates easily into collectibles, apparel, and media tie-ins. The sequel expanded that footprint, but with notable restraint. Instead of flooding the market, licensing focused on cohesion with the film's darker, more mature tone. This wasn't a cartoon chasing toys, it was a myth evolving with its audience. Internationally, the film's commercial impact followed a different logic. While Chinese mythology can pose accessibility challenges abroad, the franchise's emotional clarity outsider identity, defiance of imposed fate, travels well. Global performance wasn't framed as conquest, but as expansion. Each new market represented validation rather than necessity. The film didn't need international success to justify itself. That freedom allowed distribution strategies to prioritize reception over raw numbers. Streaming and home media added another layer to the financial picture. Animated films often enjoy extended post-theatrical life, and Ne Zha 2 was positioned to benefit from repeat viewing. Its density visual, thematic, emotional invites revisiting. That rewatch value translates into sustained engagement rather than front-loaded consumption. In commercial terms, longevity often matters more than peaks. What's particularly telling is how discourse around the box office evolved. Early conversations fixated on totals and comparisons. Later discussions shifted toward endurance. How well did the film hold? How did audiences respond after initial hype settled? Those questions signal a maturing market, one increasingly interested in cultural impact alongside financial metrics. Importantly, the film's commercial story can't be separated from its creative choices. Ne Zha 2 didn't chase the widest possible appeal by simplifying its narrative or softening its themes. That decision carried financial risk. Safer films often perform reliably. Challenging films test audience trust. The sequel bet that viewers were ready to grow with it. Box office performance, in that sense, became a referendum on audience maturity as much as brand strength. Regardless of where one lands on raw numbers, the commercial impact of Ne Zha 2 is undeniable. In one respect, it reinforced the viability of ambitious, auteur-driven, animated storytelling within a mainstream market. Studios pay attention to that. Creators do too. The ripple effects extend beyond profit margins into what kinds of projects get greenlit next. And once the money has spoken, another voice enters the conversation. Critics, commentators, and audiences grappling publicly with what the film achieved, where it stumbled, and what it represents. That response shapes legacy just as powerfully as revenue ever could. Critical reception to Ne Zha 2 unfolded less like a verdict and more like a conversation, sometimes admiring, sometimes combative, often deeply engaged. That alone marks a shift. Films that fail are dismissed. Films that merely succeed are summarized. Films that matter get argued over. This sequel landed squarely in that third category, provoking responses that went beyond star ratings into questions of ambition, responsibility, and cultural direction. Early critical reactions centered on tone. Many reviewers immediately recognized that Ne Zha 2 wasn't interested in recreating the anarchic joy of the first film beat for beat. Praise often focused on its increased emotional density, the willingness to let scenes breathe, to linger in discomfort, to trust silence as much as spectacle. Critics who connected with that shift framed the film as a natural maturation, not just of its protagonist, but of the franchise itself. They read the sequel as a statement. Animation doesn't need to stay emotionally adolescent to remain entertaining. That said, the tonal evolution also became the film's most divisive element. Some critics and viewers missed the unfiltered chaos of the original. They described the sequel as heavier, sometimes even austere, arguing that its introspection dampened momentum. For these audiences, the film's restraint felt like loss rather than growth. This split wasn't about quality so much as expectation. Viewers arrived wanting rebellion. The film offered reckoning instead. Visual craftsmanship received near-universal acclaim. Even skeptical reviews acknowledged the leap in animation fidelity, compositional confidence, and atmospheric control. Critics highlighted how the film used scale not as empty grandeur, but as emotional pressure. The world felt vast, but rarely comforting. That visual unease became a recurring point of analysis, often linked to the film's broader themes of control and consequence. Performance, particularly voice acting, emerged as a frequent point of praise. Reviewers noted the subtlety of delivery, especially in moments where silence or hesitation carried more weight than dialogue. Ne Zha's evolution from explosive force to guarded presence was repeatedly cited as evidence of thoughtful character continuity rather than franchise drift. Bing's performance, too, was singled out for its quiet tension, with several critics describing him as the film's emotional barometer. Cultural response extended beyond professional criticism into broader discourse. Online discussions dissected the film's treatment of authority, destiny, and individual agency. Some viewers interpreted the narrative as a critique of rigid systems that claim moral superiority. Others saw it as a meditation on the cost of rebellion. What happens after structures are challenged but not replaced? These debates weren't uniform, and that lack of consensus fueled engagement rather than diminishing it. The generational divide in response was particularly telling. Younger audiences, especially those who grew up with the first Ne Zha, often embraced the sequel's darker turn, reading it as reflective of their own transition into adulthood. Older viewers sometimes approached the film more cautiously, appreciating its craftsmanship while questioning its emotional heaviness in an animated format. That divergence speaks less to the film's shortcomings and more to its refusal to flatten itself for universal comfort. Awards conversations mirrored this complexity. While Ne Zha 2 earned recognition for technical achievement and animation excellence, debates persisted about its narrative boldness. Was it too ambitious or not ambitious enough? Those questions surfaced repeatedly, underscoring how difficult it is to follow a cultural lightning strike without being judged for either excess or restraint. What's undeniable is that the film refused to be invisible. It sparked essays, threads, long-form analyses, and heated comment sections. It invited viewers to revisit scenes, reinterpret motivations, and argue about intent. That kind of sustained engagement rarely accompanies disposable entertainment. In the end, critical reception positioned Ne Zha 2 as a sequel that chose risk over reassurance. Some embraced that choice fully, others resisted it, but almost no one ignored it. And in cinema, especially animation, that level of attention is a form of success all its own. All of which leads to the final question every ambitious sequel must face, beyond numbers and reviews. What does it mean? What themes endure? What legacy does it leave? And where does it stand when the dust settles? That's where the story truly concludes. By the time Ne Zha 2 reaches its final moments, the question it leaves behind isn't whether fate can be defied. That argument was settled long ago. The real question is far less comfortable. What do you do after you win? What happens when rebellion succeeds, the system cracks, and you're left standing in the aftermath with no clear map forward? This sequel lives in that uncertainty, and its themes grow sharper the longer you sit with them. At its core, Ne Zha 2 is about responsibility, the kind that arrives uninvited once power is proven real. Ne Zha no longer fights to be seen as human. He fights to decide how to be human when his actions shape the world around him. The film refuses to romanticize that burden. Power doesn't bring clarity here. It brings isolation. Every choice closes off other possibilities, and the story lingers on that cost with unusual patience for an animated feature. Authority becomes the film's most persistent antagonist, not as villainy, but as structure. The systems Ne Zha confronts aren't evil in the traditional sense. They're orderly, efficient, convincingly justified, and that's precisely why they're dangerous. The film argues, quietly but insistently, that moral certainty, when insulated from empathy, becomes indistinguishable from tyranny. No character embodies this more clearly than the calmest voices in the room. They don't threaten, they assure, and assurance is harder to fight than aggression. Ah Bing's arc sharpens this thematic tension. Where Ne Zha represents defiance, Al Bing represents accommodation, the attempt to survive within constraints by perfecting obedience. Ne Zha too doesn't condemn that instinct outright. Instead, it examines its cost. Control buys stability, but at the price of self-erasure. Al Bing's tragedy isn't that he's wrong, it's that he's almost right. And almost is where the pain lives. The film also deepens its meditation on identity. In the first installment, identity was imposed by prophecy, by society, by fear. The sequel reframes identity as accumulation. You are not what you were told you'd become. You are what you've done, what you've failed to do, and what you're still willing to risk. That perspective shifts the narrative from destiny to accountability. Ne Zha can no longer hide behind fate, even in opposition to it. Choice has consequences now. Parenthood and legacy thread quietly through the story as well. The film suggests that protection, when overextended, becomes control. Love, when fused with fear, can suffocate. These ideas surface not through speeches, but through hesitation, through moments where characters realize too late that good intentions don't absolve harm. It's a sobering message, delivered with restraint rather than accusation. What makes Ne Zha 2 resonate is its refusal to simplify these themes for comfort. The film doesn't offer a clean moral hierarchy. There is no single correct path forward, only better and worse compromises. Victory doesn't arrive as catharsis. It arrives as responsibility inherited. That's a risky emotional posture for a blockbuster, animated or otherwise. It demands engagement rather than consumption. In terms of legacy, Ne Zha 2 occupies a fascinating position. It doesn't try to eclipse its predecessor. Instead, it reframes it. The first film now feels like a prologue, a necessary explosion that clears space for harder questions. Together, they form a conversation rather than a repetition. Few animated franchises manage that level of thematic continuity without dilution. The film's influence will likely extend beyond its own narrative universe. It reinforces the idea that Chinese animation can evolve tonally without abandoning mainstream appeal. It challenges the assumption that sequels must escalate noise rather than deepen meaning. And it demonstrates that audiences, especially younger ones, are willing to follow stories into darker, more ambiguous territory if they're treated with respect. That said, Ne Zha 2 isn't flawless. Its deliberate pacing will test viewers expecting relentless momentum. Some emotional beats linger longer than strictly necessary, risking disengagement for those craving immediacy. The film asks for patience. It doesn't always reward it with spectacle. That trade-off will remain divisive. But ambition deserves credit even when it doesn't please everyone. This sequel chooses to grow instead of coast, to question instead of reassure. It trusts its audience to think, to feel discomfort, to sit with unresolved tension. In an industry increasingly driven by algorithmic safety, that trust feels almost radical. So who is Ne Zha 2 for? It's for viewers willing to accept that rebellion is only the beginning. For those who understand that power without reflection is just another form of chaos. For audiences ready to watch an animated character grow, not into a hero, but into someone capable of bearing consequence. In the end, Ne Zha 2 doesn't close its story with a declaration. It leaves you with a weight, a sense that the world doesn't reset after transformation. It remembers. And so do the people living in it. That lingering weight is its greatest achievement. The story didn't actually end when Ne Zha 2 faded to black. That final stillness, the sense of weight rather than release, was an invitation to think further. And the most revealing way to extend the conversation is to follow the idea the film keeps circling but never states outright. Fate isn't the enemy anymore. choices. The first Ne Zha framed destiny as an external sentence handed down by an unjust cosmos. Fight it, break it, prove it wrong. Simple. Cathartic. Ne Zha 2 complicates that victory by asking what freedom actually costs once it's won. Because freedom doesn't arrive with instructions, it removes excuses. And that's terrifying. Philosophically, the sequel shifts from a deterministic conflict to an existential one. Ne Zha is no longer defined by prophecy, divine judgment, or social labeling. Those forces still exist, but they no longer control him. Instead, the burden transfers inward. If you are free, then every outcome belongs to you. Failure isn't fate's fault anymore. Neither is harm. The film doesn't frame this as empowerment. It frames it as exposure. This is where Ne Zha 2 quietly aligns with existential thought rather than mythic tradition. Freedom here isn't heroic, it's isolating. Once the scaffolding of destiny collapses, Ne Zha has no narrative to hide behind. He can't say, "This is who I was made to be," or even, "This is what I was resisting." He has to decide what restraint looks like when no one is forcing him to act. Watch how often the film pauses before action. These hesitations are philosophical moments disguised as pacing. In classic myth, heroes hesitate because of doubt. Here, Ne Zha hesitates because of awareness. He knows what he can do. He knows the cost. And knowing doesn't simplify choice, it complicates it. Power without guidance is paralysis waiting to happen. Ah Bing's trajectory sharpens this contrast. Where Ne Zha struggles with unbounded freedom, Ah Bing suffocates under structured obligation. He exists at the opposite extreme, order so total it erases selfhood. The film doesn't declare one path superior. Instead, it stages a quiet philosophical collision. Absolute freedom fractures identity. Absolute control dissolves it, meaning, the film suggests, exists somewhere in the unresolved tension between the two. That's why the sequel refuses to resolve its central conflicts cleanly. Resolution would imply correctness. Ne Zha 2 isn't interested in being correct, it's interested in being honest. Systems don't vanish overnight. Trauma doesn't evaporate after a single moral victory. Responsibility doesn't feel noble when it first arrives. It feels heavy, unfair, and lonely. The film's depiction of authority reinforces this reading. The most unsettling figures aren't tyrants or monsters. They're administrators of order. Calm, rational, certain. Their belief in structure is sincere, which makes resistance morally complex rather than righteous. The question isn't, are they evil? The question is, what happens when order values stability over humanity? The film never answers directly. It lets consequences speak. This philosophical maturity is why Ne Zha 2 feels less like a sequel and more like a second movement. The first film was a declaration, "I refuse." The second is a reckoning, "Now what?" And that question doesn't belong only to Ne Zha. It belongs to the audience, especially viewers who grew up with the original film and now find themselves navigating adulthood, expectation, burnout, and choice overload. The timing isn't accidental. Ne Zha 2 arrives in a cultural moment where rebellion is common, but direction is scarce. The film mirrors that uncertainty rather than resolving it. This is also why the sequel resists overt moral lessons. It doesn't tell you how to live. It shows you the cost of living without guarantees. That's a far riskier message for an animated blockbuster than any speech about courage or destiny. It assumes emotional intelligence. It trusts ambiguity. It lets discomfort linger. In doing so, Ne Zha 2 quietly reframes heroism. Heroism isn't defiance anymore. It's restraint. It's choosing not to act when action would be easier. It's carrying power without letting power define you. That's not a triumphant image. It's a sobering one. And it's exactly why the film stays with you. So when the credits roll and the music fades, the story continues, not on screen, but internally. The film doesn't close a myth. It opens a question. If you are no longer bound by fate, who are you willing to become? That question is heavier than any prophecy. And that's why Ne Zha 2 doesn't need destiny anymore. Ne Zha has always been more than a character. From the moment he snarled at destiny in the first film, he stopped belonging solely to mythology and started operating as a cultural signal. Ne Zha 2 sharpens that signal, not by making him louder or cooler, but by making him tired. And that exhaustion is exactly why he resonates now more than ever. In traditional myth, Ne Zha is a symbol of rebellion taken to its extreme, so extreme that it ends in self-destruction and rebirth. Classical stories frame that sacrifice as moral purification. Ne Zha 2 quietly rejects that framing. This version of Ne Zha doesn't want to destroy himself for balance or harmony. He wants to exist without being constantly corrected, managed, or defined. That shift transforms him from a mythic rebel into a modern one. This is where the character connects directly to contemporary audiences, especially younger generations. Ne Zha isn't fighting gods anymore. He's fighting expectations that never stop updating themselves. Win once and the rules change. Prove them wrong and the standard moves. That emotional loop feels painfully familiar to anyone navigating modern pressure systems. Education, careers, family expectation, social identity. The film never names these parallels, but it doesn't need to. They're embedded in the way Ne Zha carries himself now, defensive, alert, bracing for the next demand. What makes Ne Zha 2 culturally potent is its refusal to glamorize rebellion as a permanent solution. The first film's defiance felt euphoric because it needed to. It was an origin myth. This sequel interrogates what happens when rebellion becomes your identity. If you only know how to resist, what happens when resistance works? Who are you when the fight no longer defines you? That question lands hard in a cultural moment saturated with performative defiance. Online outrage, ideological posturing, endless cycles of calling out authority. Rebellion has become a language many people speak fluently. Direction, however, is harder to find. Ne Zha 2 reflects that tension by showing a protagonist who has mastered resistance but struggles with purpose. He's not lost because he lacks strength. He's lost because strength alone doesn't tell you where to go. The film's depiction of authority reinforces this relevance. Authority figures aren't monsters or villains. They're systems with polite voices and clean logic. They promise safety, stability, and order. In exchange, they ask for compliance, not violently, but persistently. That's a far more accurate mirror of modern power structures than overt tyranny. Control today rarely announces itself as oppression. It presents itself as reason. Ne Zha's refusal to fully submit or fully overthrow those systems places him in an uncomfortable middle ground. He doesn't become a revolutionary icon waving flags. He becomes something quieter and harder to celebrate, a person choosing restraint over reaction. That choice doesn't trend easily. It doesn't inspire slogans. But it reflects the kind of maturity many viewers recognize in themselves, even if they struggle to articulate it. Bing's cultural symbolism runs parallel but opposite. He embodies the high-achieving conformist, the one who internalizes expectations so thoroughly that obedience feels like identity. His suffering isn't dramatic, it's polished. And that's precisely why it's dangerous. In many ways, Bing reflects the cultural ideal more than Ne Zha ever could. Disciplined, controlled, admired. Ne Zha 2 exposes the cost of that ideal without mocking it. Bing isn't weak, he's exhausted. And exhaustion, not failure, is the film's quiet villain. This duality, Ne Zha's volatile freedom and Bing's suffocating order, mirrors a generational split many viewers feel internally. Do you resist and risk chaos, or comply and risk erasure? The film doesn't pretend there's a clean answer. Instead, it suggests that identity is negotiated continuously, not chosen once. That idea resonates deeply in a world where selfhood feels perpetually provisional. Even the film's humor participates in this cultural conversation. The jokes are sharper, drier, more self-aware. Laughter doesn't explode anymore, it flickers. Comedy becomes a coping mechanism rather than release. That tonal adjustment reflects how humor functions culturally now, ironic, defensive, a shield against burnout rather than a celebration of joy. What elevates Ne Zha 2 beyond topical relevance is its refusal to chase relatability at the expense of myth. The film doesn't flatten Ne Zha into a contemporary avatar with modern slang and easy metaphors. It lets him remain mythic, larger than life, dangerous, inconvenient. That scale gives cultural reflection weight. You're not watching a mirror, you're watching a distorted reflection that makes truths harder to ignore. Over time, this is likely why Ne Zha 2 will endure. Not because it offers answers, but because it articulates a feeling many struggle to name. The fatigue that follows defiance, the loneliness that follows independence, the fear that freedom might demand more than fate ever did. Ne Zha doesn't become a role model in the traditional sense. He becomes a companion in uncertainty, someone who proves that confusion isn't failure. It's the cost of thinking for yourself. And that may be the most modern myth of all. The easiest way to misunderstand Ne Zha 2 is to treat it as a louder echo of the first film. Put the two side by side, though, and something far more interesting emerges. This isn't repetition, it's revision. Scene by scene, beat by beat, the sequel doesn't try to top Ne Zha 2019, it interrogates it. It asks what those earlier moments mean after the adrenaline fades. Start with how conflict begins. In the first film, confrontation is immediate. Ne Zha enters scenes like a spark in dry grass, reaction precedes thought. Authority provokes him, society rejects him, fate threatens him, and he explodes accordingly. The energy is outward. In Ne Zha 2, conflict starts internally. Scenes often open with stillness, with Ne Zha already tense before anyone challenges him. The fight now happens before the clash, inside his head. That alone marks a fundamental evolution. Impulse has been replaced by anticipation. Look at how Ne Zha occupies space. In the 2019 film, he dominates frames, aggressively wide stances, exaggerated motion, constant physical assertion. The world feels too small for him, and that's the point. He's overflowing with power and resentment. In the sequel, he often feels out of sync with his environment. He stands slightly apart. He hesitates before stepping forward. When he moves forcefully now, it feels like a decision rather than a reflex. Same character, entirely different posture. The emotional beats tell an even clearer story. In the first film, pain is externalized. Ne Zha lashes out because he doesn't know what else to do with rejection. His anger is communication. In Ne Zha 2, pain turns inward. Anger becomes controlled, sometimes suppressed, sometimes redirected. Scenes that would have erupted into chaos in the original now stall into silence. The absence of explosion is the evolution. He's learned restraint, but not peace. Bing's transformation is equally revealing. In Ne Zha 2019, he functions as a tragic mirror, gentle, obedient, doomed by expectation. His emotional arc is reactive, responding to pressure placed upon him. In Ne Zha 2, he becomes proactive, but in a constrained way. He chooses control rather than chaos. Scenes that once framed him as sympathetic now frame him as conflicted. His calm no longer reassures, it unsettles. That shift reframes the entire dynamic between the two characters. They're no longer opposites, they're alternate outcomes. Consider how parental figures are used. In the first film, parents are emotional anchors, sources of unconditional love standing against a hostile world. Their presence stabilizes Ne Zha's identity. In the sequel, that stability fractures. Parents hesitate, they worry, they misjudge. Scenes that once offered comfort now introduce doubt. The film isn't undermining parental love, it's acknowledging its limits. Protection can't last forever. That realization marks the transition from childhood to adulthood more clearly than any speech could. Action itself evolves dramatically. Ne Zha 2019 treats action as release. Fights are cathartic, chaotic, celebratory. Destruction feels justified because it pushes back against injustice. In Ne Zha 2, action feels costly. Every strike lands with consequence. The camera lingers on aftermath rather than impact. Scenes end not with triumph, but with stillness and damage. Violence stops being expression and becomes responsibility. Same scale, different meaning. Even humor shifts its function. The first film's comedy is loud, defiant, often crude laughter as rebellion. The sequel's humor is drier, sharper, sometimes deliberately uncomfortable. Jokes don't relieve tension, they expose it. Ne Zha uses humor defensively now, not joyfully. That tonal adjustment mirrors real emotional growth. When humor becomes armor, it signals experience. Perhaps the most telling comparison lies in how both films end their major sequences. Ne Zha 2019 consistently resolves scenes with emotional payoff, acceptance, victory, catharsis. Ne Zha 2 often ends scenes mid-thought. Conversations trail off. Conflicts pause without resolution. The film refuses to grant emotional closure where none exists. That choice alone signals confidence. It trusts the audience to live with uncertainty. Seen together, the two films form a single arc rather than competing statements. The first is about identity forged through defiance. The second is about identity tested by consequence. One breaks destiny. The other asks what replaces it. That progression feels intentional, not accidental. It respects the audience's intelligence and emotional growth. This is why Ne Zha 2 doesn't diminish the original. It completes it. The chaos of the first film now reads as necessary immaturity. The restraint of the second reads as earned. You can't skip either without losing meaning. Together, they chart a rare trajectory in animation, a hero who doesn't just get stronger, but wiser and more burdened. And that comparison sets the stage for the next, deeper question. If the films are evolving away from classical myth structure, what exactly are they changing on purpose, and why does that matter? That's where the mythology itself comes under the knife. The deeper Ne Zha 2 goes, the clearer it becomes that this franchise isn't adapting mythology so much as arguing with it, not rejecting it outright, not parodying it, but deliberately reshaping it, cut by cut, character by character, until the old moral machinery no longer runs the way it used to. Continuation 16 is where that surgery becomes impossible to ignore. Classical Ne Zha mythology is rigid in its moral geometry. Order exists. Transgression disrupts it. Sacrifice restores balance. Even rebellion ultimately serves harmony. The myth forgives Ne Zha only after he destroys himself and is remade under divine supervision. Power must be corrected. Chaos must be contained. Individual will is tolerated only when it submits to cosmic hierarchy. Ne Zha 2 breaks that equation completely. The most radical change isn't cosmetic, it's philosophical. This version of the myth refuses to treat harmony as an unquestioned good. Order is no longer synonymous with justice. Balance is no longer neutral. And sacrifice is no longer automatically noble. The film asks a question. Classical mythology never allowed who benefits from harmony and who pays for it. In traditional tellings, divine authority is absolute. Gods may be flawed, but their system is assumed necessary. Ne Zha 2 strips that assumption bare. Authority figures are calm, articulate, rational, and deeply unsettling. They don't demand obedience through fear. They offer it through logic, stability, protection, continuity. This reframing is deliberate. The film isn't interested in overthrowing gods. It's interested in exposing the emotional cost of systems that prize order over humanity. This is where mythology is most clearly rewritten. Fate in classical myth is a moral verdict. In Ne Zha 2, fate is bureaucracy, impersonal, procedural, maintained not by cruelty, but by policy. That shift alone modernizes the myth more effectively than any visual update ever could. It transforms destiny from a cosmic sentence into an administrative function. And suddenly, rebellion isn't blasphemy, it's dissent. Ne Zha's refusal to self-sacrifice is another critical divergence. In older stories, his self-destruction is framed as redemption. The individual must erase himself to restore balance. The sequel rejects that logic entirely. Ne Zha does not believe his existence is a mistake that must be corrected. He believes harm caused by systems should be confronted, not absolved through personal annihilation. That's a fundamental moral reversal, and a deeply contemporary one. Bing's role sharpens this critique. Classical myth often positions figures like him as cautionary examples. Obedience leads to tragedy, reinforcing the hero's righteousness. Ne Zha 2 complicates that narrative. Bing isn't wrong, he's logical. His compliance keeps the system running smoothly. The film treats his path with empathy rather than condemnation. That empathy destabilizes mythic certainty. If obedience isn't evil and rebellion isn't pure, then morality becomes situational rather than absolute. Even the concept of punishment evolves. Mythological justice traditionally arrives as retribution, swift, decisive, spectacular. The sequel replaces that with consequence. Actions ripple outward. Damage lingers. No divine reset button restores equilibrium. This isn't how myths usually function. Myths resolve. Ne Zha 2 remembers. The visual language reinforces this rewrite relentlessly. Divine spaces feel sterile rather than sacred. Architecture prioritizes symmetry over warmth. Light flattens rather than uplifts. Heaven isn't evil, but it's emotionally vacant. This is mythology stripped of transcendence and rendered administrative. Gods don't loom, they oversee. And oversight, the film suggests, can be just as dehumanizing as tyranny. What makes this approach risky is that it removes moral comfort. Traditional myths reassure audiences that the universe ultimately makes sense. Ne Zha 2 denies that reassurance. It suggests that systems persist not because they are just, but because they are stable. That's a dangerous idea to introduce into myth, especially myth aimed at younger audiences. And yet, the film never becomes nihilistic. It simply refuses to lie. Instead of destiny, the sequel centers negotiation. Identity is no longer discovered. It's constructed under pressure. Morality is no longer inherited. It's chosen repeatedly. The gods aren't overthrown. They're challenged. And that challenge doesn't end cleanly, because real systems rarely do. This is why Ne Zha 2 feels less like a retelling and more like a rebuttal. It respects the myth enough to dismantle it carefully. It keeps the characters, the iconography, the stakes, but rewires the values underneath. That's not adaptation. That's reinterpretation with intent. And that intent matters, because myths survive not by staying pure, but by staying useful. Ne Zha 2 updates the myth for a world where authority is opaque, rebellion is exhausting, and moral clarity is rare. It doesn't offer a new doctrine to replace the old one. It offers something more honest, uncertainty with responsibility attached. Which brings us to the final extension of this analysis. Not about what the film changes, but about what it will become over time. How it will age. How it will be remembered once immediacy fades and reflection begins. That's where this journey truly ends. Time is the final, most honest critic. Box office fades. Discourse cools. Hype evaporates. What remains is memory, and whether a film still feels alive once it's no longer surrounded by noise. This is where Ne Zha 2 makes its quietest, boldest bet. It isn't built to dominate a moment. It's built to outlast it. Films that age well usually share one trait. They were misunderstood, or at least incompletely understood, at release. Not rejected, but unsettled. Ne Zha 2 fits that pattern cleanly. Its reception was intense, thoughtful, divided. That division isn't a weakness. It's the soil longevity grows from. Consensus creates closure. Debate keeps a film breathing. What gives Ne Zha 2 long-term gravity is how little it relies on novelty. Its spectacle is impressive, but not gimmick-driven. Its themes aren't trendy slogans tied to a specific cultural flashpoint. Instead, the film anchors itself in pressures that don't expire: authority, responsibility, exhaustion, choice without certainty. These don't belong to 2025. They belong to anyone who's ever grown out of rebellion and realized adulthood doesn't come with answers, only consequences. Rewatch the film years from now, and different things will surface. On first viewing, many audiences focus on tone, how heavy it feels compared to the first film. On later viewings, that heaviness starts to read as precision. Scenes once labeled slow reveal themselves as deliberate spaces for thought. Silences become more meaningful. Pauses feel earned rather than indulgent. What initially felt restrained begins to feel confident. Ne Zha himself will age particularly well as a character. Not because he's aspirational, but because he's honest. He doesn't offer a fantasy of permanent defiance or righteous victory. He offers fatigue, hesitation, moral weight. As viewers age, that portrayal gains resonance rather than losing it. Teen rebellion thrills once. Adult responsibility lingers. Albing's arc may age even more sharply. Over time, audiences tend to grow more sympathetic toward characters trapped by expectation rather than those who loudly reject it. Albing's controlled suffering, his disciplined compliance, his quiet unraveling. These are things many people recognize only in hindsight. His tragedy doesn't explode. It accumulates. That accumulation mirrors real life far more closely than mythic downfall. Visually, the film avoids the kind of excess that dates quickly. There's no obsession with trend-driven effects or over-designed spectacle meant to impress immediately. The cinematography favors clarity and mood over flash. Production design emphasizes texture over novelty. These choices give the film a timeless quality. It won't look old so much as considered. Culturally, Ne Zha 2 is positioned to gain stature as conversations around animation continue to evolve. As audiences increasingly reject the idea that animation must be light, moralized, or simplified, this film will feel less like an outlier and more like a forerunner. Its refusal to dilute complexity will read as courage rather than risk. There's also the franchise context to consider. Should future installments exist, Ne Zha 2 will likely stand as the pivot point, the moment the series chose depth over repetition. Even if later entries escalate scale or shift tone, this film will remain the one that asks the hardest questions. That kind of middle chapter often becomes the most respected in retrospect, even if it wasn't the most immediately beloved. Importantly, Ne Zha 2 doesn't demand reverence. It doesn't announce itself as profound. It allows audiences to arrive at meaning gradually or not at all. That humility invites revisitation. Films that insist on importance tend to exhaust themselves. Films that trust viewers tend to linger. So where does that leave the final verdict? Ne Zha 2 is not a comfort film. It's not a pure crowd pleaser. It doesn't chase universal approval. What it does is rarer. It respects its audience enough to let them sit with discomfort, uncertainty, and unresolved tension. It treats growth as costly rather than glamorous. It treats freedom as responsibility rather than reward. That choice will never satisfy everyone, and it shouldn't, because the films that last aren't the ones that give us answers. They're the ones that stay with us while we keep asking the questions. Years from now, when the numbers are forgotten and the debates have quieted, Ne Zha 2 will still feel heavy in the hands, still thoughtful, still unresolved. And that unresolved weight carried forward rather than discharged is the clearest sign that the film knew exactly what it was doing.